very good evening to each one of you. On behalf of Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we express our sincere thanks for making it convenient to participate at this panel discussions on issues being raised as part of the audit proceedings. This is the fifth in the webinar series on GST audits by the tax office, organized under the aegis of Indirect Taxes Expert Committee. For the kind information of our participants, the committee is chaired by Mr. Badrinath, who is the partner Singvi Dev and Unni, co-chaired by Mr. Arun Ramchandran, who is the head taxation of Tata Consumer Products, and mentored by Mr. Shivdas, who is the senior advocate, Shivdas and Shivdas Law Chambers, and Mr. P.V. Srinivasan, who is the advisor to Wipro Limited.
Sure, thanks, Luca, for the quick start of this session. Good evening to all of you. A very good evening indeed. This is the last of the session that we have series that we started in December. It's really about the audits, assessments, proceedings by the tax office. So we've heard about what is it that we should not do or should do when we get an update. What to expect from the rights and privileges. What is the tax office? The session, full discussion with Mr. Shivdas and Arun on what are the challenges that we have as part of these audits? What are the issues that are coming up? So as part of this, we'll also check out from them on issues are in terms of what is the position that we recommend for a taxpayer and so on. So we take it as it comes. So the idea of today's discussion is, as I told you, we have Mr. Shivdas. I don't think any of the members, any of the panelists need an introduction. Mr. Shivdas, once again, our own. I've learned a lot from him. I used to go to him for anything and everything, and he was there to me. That's not all. Even to him a lot. Thank you for it. And we have Mr. Kannan. He's the head of taxation, Britannia Industries. He's a very active member of the chamber of the indirect. Arun, of course, co-chair. We are the people, all the do's and the don'ts. Is my voice good?
Sorry
No,
to interrupt, sir.
very clear, Badri.
Sir, your voice is not clear, sir.
Sorry, I just closed the window. Is it better now?
Yes, much better. Yes.
I closed the window. So we'll start the session today. So I'll start with requesting some comment, some opening remarks, and then maybe I will have an interactive session with them. A few questions to each one of them before we open it to the rest of the team, rest of the audience for their questions. So may I request for a quick 2-3 minute opening remarks from you?
Very good evening to all of you. The topic of what are the challenges which we face in GST and how they could be addressed is something which arise on a daily basis, because the way I have seen is the challenges vary from company to company, from an officer to officer, though the law is more or less the same for everybody, but then the manner in which it is being seen from the administration perspective and from the assessee's perspective is varies from person to person. We have come across different types of situations narrated to us by different companies as to what is expected from them by the department and how they are able to satisfy in some cases and not satisfy in some cases. So the question is, how do we all of us have a sort of a uniform understanding of what is it that we should be clear in giving to the department and what is the expectation from us in terms of the law, so that it's if there's a uniform approach among SSEs in a particular sector, etc., even the administration also will be quite comfortable in knowing that all the SSEs of this sector would provide this information. And therefore, if we need something more, we can always go back to the SSEs and ask them instead of asking each SSE differently. So that sort of a uniform approach would come out through discussions like this, where we do exchange the views we have, the experiences we have, so that it's easier for the SSEs also to stand up to maybe the questions from the department. I think in that way, these discussions would definitely help most of us. I keep always learning from people who talk to me as to what their experiences is and what they think the law is. In fact, most of the times people do tell me that this is what that section reads, and therefore my reading of the section was completely different till the time they tell me that. And then when I go back and read the section, I get a different perspective. So that way it does help all of us to really have views on each stand that is being taken by the department. So to that extent, these discussions do help us. And then, of course, we have a good set of people to discuss this. So I think this discussion should help all of us.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for setting the tone. When we talk about these proceedings by the topics, there are, I think the current flavor or maybe the current feeling, the season of the audits, the experience, the anybody's comment starts with, that's not right, this is not right, kind of a thing. So maybe I'll also use the same thing to start with the discussion today. So, one of the asks from the trading largely been, especially where a single taxpayer has got multiple GSTs, whether within the state or multiple states either way. The ask is that uniformity in the way the proceedings are conducted. Maybe the documentation, maybe the positions. If I'm not asking for too much, there has to be a uniformity in the proceedings has been one ask. And the second very important thing in this regard is that, when there is proceedings initiated by one, say state government, one of the teams has initiated some proceedings, it is unfair. I'll come to the legal part later, but it is considered and incorrect for another team of the state, maybe the state government only to initiate proceedings.
There's a break in your voice, Badri.
Oh, is it? Okay, I don't know. Maybe I'll remove the video for a few minutes.
Yeah, because the flow is not coming through the speech.
Yeah, I'll remove the video for a few minutes. So the second part of that I was telling was, when one team is actually doing the carrying out some, it is incorrect or unfair or starts the. So in this breath, Mr. Kannan, for you, would you, Sir Kannan, sir, how would you that uniformity has achieved or where it is not achieved?
See, as far as uniformity is concerned, what I notice is that the only thing which is uniform is the notices which they are using for assessment, for providing the list of documents. This probably is coming out of some guidelines issued by the various state governments on what are the documents to be required from the assessee. I think that is the only uniformity we have seen so far. Now, coming to any other matter, I don't see any uniformity. So, if you want me to go further, I can list out what are the things I have experienced.
Okay.
So, the non-uniform cases are those where, take a classic example of TRC, Transit Credit Audit. We have seen this during the GST regime beginning itself. Two state government authorities claim to be the owner of our jurisdiction and asking the data. And CGST officer also says, I am the right person. And all of them asking different questions. Okay, once it is resolved, then somebody says, I want to visit your factory, then we give the data. Then after some time, maybe even after 2 years also, once again, some of the states raise again the issues. And then what they try to do is that what answers they already have, they know by visiting the locations, by email exchanges, all the data. They now, if at all they want to do an assessment or anything, they don't do any assessment. Instead of ASMT, they are directly getting into that show cause notices. And for example, they can use DRC, and that actually converts into a show cause notice and then order. Even the explanation what giving as a response to the show cause notice, which are originally given when the transit credit audit was going on, again they are converting into that so that they can ask for some pre-deposit or something like that. This I think is not a let-down procedure, because one authority is convinced, another authority says I am the your right person, so we give the data. The third person comes into the picture saying I am the final authority, then issue the show cause notice. So here I see that there is no uniformity in asking. So it's always like this, whether it is for transit credit, even for anything random informations, they don't, they ask for a particular period, again they ask for another period. After that, what happens, we don't know. Then they ask for reconciliations. There is no actually set of process in which you should approach the SSC for what matter, how do you do like that. Earlier, those authorities were crystal clear in excise, service tax and all. They know what type of questions. Then they are EA to 2000 audit and all. There is set of documents and what questions you should ask and what conclusion you should derive. Now it's like a aimless thing. And what explanations we are giving are also not taken at all.
Okay. Okay. So there are more aspects where there is no uniformity than there is than there actually is, in summary. So the second part of the question, the second part of the thing that I discussed, I'll go to Mr. Shivdas, sir. Sir, would you like to share your thoughts on what should be the approach by the department when one set of proceedings has already begun? Is it right? Is it appropriate? Or as a taxpayer, what can I do or what shouldn't I do? When there is another team, maybe of the state, maybe of the center, who come and ask for the same set of information for similar proceedings.
You see, there's we have to be clear about what happens in practice and what does the law envisage. Now, this is something which I have been trying to understand. You see, if you see from a practice perspective, even before GST, we always had officers of different governments coming back and asking questions on the same transaction. For example, on a service transaction, we had the VAT department coming and asking questions and maybe just trying to raise an issue that VAT is payable, etc. But there was always this conflict between the central government and the state government on the same transactions being subjected to tax, the respective taxes. Now, this mindset becomes more pronounced in GST because it's the same tax with both of them are administered. Now, it is only to get over this problem of same person or same issue being taken by two different officers, one by the state and one by the center. The Act prescribes that while for the purpose of inquiry, any proper officer can do the inquiry, but once proceedings are initiated, then on the same subject matter, the proceedings cannot be initiated by the another officer. That there is a safeguard in the Act. For example, if you do a comparison between maybe a section 70 and then a section 6. 70 is the one that provides for an officer to do an inquiry. And it also says who can do an inquiry. It depends on who is defined as a proper officer, who is assigned the jurisdiction of a particular SSA, etc. Under section 70, he can do it. Now, in terms of section 6, if you look at section 6, it's very significantly worded. It says that if on a particular subject matter, a proceedings is initiated by a particular officer, then the state office, if suppose let's assume it's done by the center officer, The state officer cannot initiate proceedings on the same subject matter. So it's very confined. Now, proceedings would evidently not include the stages up to the inquiry. Proceedings evidently would be once the show cause notice is issued. Same subject matter would mean the same issue. Now, what is the same subject matter? Can two different authorities look at the same subject matter for different purposes? For example, a royalty payment. A central officer can look at it from a different, say, evaluation perspective. A state officer can look at it from maybe an input tax credit perspective. So do we say that it is an same subject matter, two different officers are looking at it? Maybe it would be difficult. So that is why section 6 is very, I would say, strictly worded to say that on a particular subject matter, if any proceedings is initiated by the central officer, correspondingly you will have a provision in the state GST Act. Like a section 6 in the central GST Act, you will have a provision in state GST Act. So there it will say the central officer cannot do it if a state officer does it. So therefore, the exclusivity or jurisdiction gets confined only to the same subject matter. Otherwise, for the purpose of inquiry, the law doesn't seem to prohibit one officer looking at the same activities or activities of an assessee, even when another officer looking at it. In fact, I did come across, I think, one Allahabad High Court judgment or something that said, made a distinction between what section 70 would say, what does section 6 say, and therefore how an inquiry is different from an proceedings. So to that extent, it would be difficult to say that one officer should not look into what the other officer has done. That's one. But in a situation where a particular subject matter has already been seen and examined, and maybe a conclusion is arrived at, I think we would be justified in going back to the other officer to say that so and so has seen it, he has come to this conclusion. Unless you have a reason to doubt the correctness of that, you should not be reopening the same issue. So those principles of law can continue to apply. It's not as if they cannot. Because there are provisions in the Act by which the satisfaction of an officer can always be re-examined at an higher level, etc. It is possible. Unless that is done, we can always go back to the officer and say, somebody has seen it, put a stop to it. But if the subject matter is different, then it will be difficult for assessees to say that you should not look at it merely because somebody else has seen it. That seems to be the distinction which I am seeing in terms of jurisdictions.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That was very informative actually for all of us to maybe take note whenever we kind of get two people looking at our transactions. In the same breath, when we know that when we have a tax office coming, when they visited, I'll take your thoughts on this. When would you believe that we are ready for an assessment, a set of proceedings to be carried out by the tax office? Would you suggest something, a checklist, things that we need to be ready with before we kind of say we for it?
Right. Hope I'm audible, Badri. You can hear me clearly. Sure. So before I answer your question, Mr. Kannan raised a very important point on consistency across. GST, when was introduced, we were all told it is one nation, one tax. It stopped with one nation, one tax. It is multiple assessments, multiple GST positions, and multiple advance authorities issuing different positions. I'm sorry. If issuing different positions. So the need of the hour is consistency. When we have one law, it is important that there is consistency in interpretation, consistency in positions taken, which is only right expectation from an industry standpoint. Now it comes to assessment. Assessments probably is more a recent experience. We've just started seeing a lot of assessment notices come through in many states than what it was the case earlier, at least a year ago. The information, like Anand sir mentioned, there is some level of consistency in the information they're asking. There are about 80% of the information is common across a lot of states. So one can assess what is the expectation of the authorities. Having said this is the information that is being asked for 2 years ago or 3 years ago when GST was introduced, probably from 2017 onwards, the assessments have been started now. So the GST authorities had the benefit of time. If we are asked information of 2017 or 18 in the current length of the checklist, it is getting difficult to be overly or be well prepared with respect to historic data. But this has been a good learning, at least future from a future readiness standpoint. So one can look at this as suggestive list and prepare themselves for assessments. Having said that, it has been evolving. The notices that we've got last year to what we are seeing now, the information has increased. The kind of information that they're asking has also increased. An interesting point is, somewhere the authorities are still seem to be stuck with the VAT audit procedure. The checklist that is being floating around sounds or reads very similar to what we used to get at VAT audit times. But in GST, a lot of these have been automated. Something like an e-way bill information. Should they even ask for e-way bill information? When e-way bill is generated from the GST portal, the authorities have access to e-way bill invoice copies. Do they need to ask for invoice copies when there is a two-way reconciliation being undertaken? Yes, you can ask for two-way reconciliation. They'll be the assessees will be happy to provide. But somewhere there has to be a one level of moderation of what is the information available with the tax office and what should not be burdened on the assessees or registered dealers for this information. So that is a, a big ask from the industry. Keep the list sharp, keep the list as small as possible, and please leverage on the information already available with the GST authorities. Having said that, there will still be surprises in information. We've seen a lot of 26 AS reconciliation. We never expected a reconciliation of 26 AS to the GST returns. Those are sort of things which have come up in the recent list. One big information that has been floating around as a ask is the state-wise trial balance, where I think we, one of our previous sessions raised this as a concern with the principal commissioner as well. How practical is it for a company with presence in multiple states to have a state-wise trial balance sort of a thing put in place where the accounting systems do not support, where the accounting standards do not support, require a company is not required to prepare a state-wise TB. Can tax authorities ask for something like that? These are things which are expected of, but the industry is unclear as to how do we comply. There are information which is expected of, where there is some level of clarity that has now emerged on how we can comply with, and there are the lists like these where we are unclear how do we meet the requirement. Things like e-way bill statements. E-way bill statements, I can probably see the last 6 months e-way bill records on the e-way bill portal. I can't see beyond 6 months. So how is an assessee expected to get this information when he doesn't have access to this information? So these are things which I think the list will get pruned as we go along. The tax authorities pick their learnings of audit experience. The industry also picks, but there is a increasingly an expectation of assessment preparedness, uh, given that there is a list that is floating around and we know what the authorities are expecting. There, industry is actually gearing with assessment preparedness at this point. Things like will the authorities ask for IRN on all invoices to be captured in your purchase register? Because currently most ERP systems do not support capturing IRN on the invoices. Yes, sale invoices IRN are captured, but when you get invoices from your vendors, that IRN is not really captured in SAP. Would that be an expectation at a future date? Probably yes, but the industry again will have to think of elements like these, which will keep coming up and evolve with time to prepare a robust file for defenses.
Sure. Thank you so much. There are two essential that you mentioned, Arun. One is the kind of information that the department is asking is getting defined with time to come. I mean, as days pass by, the ask is changing. And second, of course, you touched upon a very important thing, a very uncomfortable thing, which is, I would say, is the issue of state-wise trial balance. I think it went into a heated discussion in the previous thing that we were discussing with the Principal Chief Commissioner and the Commissioner of State. So I'll take you from that and say, Sir Kannan sir, I'm a very strong believer that when there is a decision taken on one particular date, you should not reach a decision based on understandings or inferences or wisdom that a person acquires on a subsequent date. That is not a very good evaluation the decision taken. But I think the exception to that is the tax law, right? Because any new learning that comes up has an impact for the past, right? So in the same breath, sir, let me put it this way. Tax certainty from a business point of view is something I wouldn't, I think I'm undermining it if I say it's an ask from the taxpayer side. I think it's a basic requirement when we want to administer the law. But given the fluidity, given the diverse views, given the current structure of advance rulings, sir, needless to say, there are the views taken are diverse. It's similar but different benches. And there are cases where I have applied in this case for say for my company, I've applied for an advance ruling in Karnataka and in Delhi matter for a similar transaction, similar matter. I have got two diverse views. Sir, how should I? Because these questions are bound to come up as part of the saying, how can you? Well, on one hand, you are asking for uniformity, right? You cannot have a different set of the rules that you've applied for your own transaction in different states. Sir, so how do I deal with this, sir?
So I will first share our experience. So in advance rulings, the same story. Whatever you say, I will do whatever I want. You go and explain. The central excise officer, the authority and state authorities both are sitting and hearing. We keep on telling a lot of things on mostly HSN basis. I'm not talking about all other GST related. One common thing on classification. Classification has been set. There is lots of plenty of decisions on central excise or VAT, where HSN is also there on customs. We did not learn new. There are more than 20 years of decisions and even recent decisions which have settled some positions. When everything is mentioned, they hear it. Ultimately, they decide what they want to say. Even if you say that there is a decision in the another state, they try to overcome it, saying, no, there was a problem. These people have falsely said that there is an investigation going on. They have not told this, and therefore that decision is wrong. Even though it relates to your own product, it is wrong. So anyhow, I want to decide, and that decision will be in my favor. So whatever positions you give, I will not agree to that. So when there is a law which is settled in India, and your CESTAT, Supreme Court, so many judgments are there, they don't want to listen to that. So that is one issue. The second issue, whatever we found was, the root cause of all this problem is, it is similar to a DRP in income tax, where everything is preset. If at all by chance you get a relief in DRP for 1 or 2 matters, you made your day. Otherwise, it is known. You go to DRP, you get only unfavorable orders. Today, advance ruling also, when it was in VAT advance ruling or in income tax advance rulings, at least there were cases where there is a possibility of getting some favorable positions. Here, very, very rarely you see a favorable position. That is all coming because of the officers of the department who are sitting and deciding it. So why can't we make a system very similar to a tribunal? Because today we don't have a GST tribunal. We have to rely upon this set of system. If not, they can't do for the first level AR. For double AR, why can't they bring a tribunal setup where you have a judicial member, and at least for HSN matters, you have similar to transfer pricing where you have one bench for transfer pricing, specialized people only for that matter, leave alone all other matters, and even any number of authorities are deciding 10, 20 decisions are taken. They are naturally people are going to come to the appellate authority. Appellate authority can club and take a decision. This will bring certain uniformity. Of course, we cannot say we are coming in the way of the jurisdiction where I cannot say one officer has decided in one state, you can't decide in another state. Because if today even high courts are everywhere, the same decisions are again and again done in many places. At least at the appellate level, let us have one national authority, and they can have several benches, and those benches can be having specialized topics. Primarily HSN, there can be again repetitive topics. So those authorities decide and then club the things, and we will know at least at one level we'll get a relief. Today, it's like you are going and asking for a decision where you already know that you will get only unfavorable decision. At least I can say that I have taken a position like asking a legal opinion. That's all. So what else today advanced ruling does? It doesn't really serve the purpose. If it is only going to be in favor of the department, then there is no advanced ruling authority required.
Sure, sure. Sir, taking the same aspect to the next level. So maybe what you rightly said, the concept of advanced ruling should take cue from the DRP or the advanced ruling mechanism under the erstwhile service tax or central excise laws. So in this aspect, sir, we ask from the industry side is more on establishing something on the concept of LTD. Something on the concept of LTD. So that, where a single taxpayer or a company has got presence in multiple states, maybe there is certainty, there is uniformity, maybe all what we've discussed till now is a mechanism to kind of achieve that. Sir, I'd like to take this in two parts. One is it a reasonable ask from the industry side to get the government to kind of consider this? And second is, sir, more specifically to Shivda, sir, on the legal side, given the current structure of the law, would you believe that we can do it, or is there a change to the law that could be required? Uh,
So the question is to me first.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I would say
Kannan, both the questions to you. Kannan, both the questions to you.
Sir, legal only you can answer, sir. We can tell about the problems and our points only. When you are sitting, nobody else can talk about legal side.
Somebody said in the parliament, I give you permission to talk of Dinamari. Yes, we give you permission to talk.
See, in LTO, if you go by the experiences we had in the central excise regime and income tax regime, there are diverse views in the LTO. Some people say that it is again similar to advanced ruling, it's full of problems. Some people say yes, there are good and bad points and all. I have seen both sides. In my experience with LTO, I have seen good things coming out of the offices where you also undergo a trauma sometimes. Sometimes you get a good decisions on key matters. So it's a mixed point. But the real purpose of LTO is emanating from the multiple jurisdictions, answering the same thing again and again, giving the setup. One side you can say, yes, I have the jurisdiction over you, I can ask this question, the other officer has asked another point. For everything, you have to prepare for some timeline, attach the documents, get it properly verified, vetted, and silent. Immediately you send it to another authority. So instead of that, I see the positive sides of LTO, where if it exists, from the corporate side, one is we have most of the companies today have a central GST team. The central GST teams are in, they do all the jobs, right from the complaints, the assessment and litigation. Earlier days, when you had a excise, you have a factory officers managing excise, then you have regional officers managing VAT. So it was possible for attending different state matters by different people. Now, at a uniform level, there are only few sets of people working in one place. Now, in a centralized system, you cannot be filing your returns and within immediately go to some state and appear before him for some matter, again come back and do another issue and submitting your data for assessment. If it happens at, say, today I can be called in Tamil Nadu assessment, the same person has to go for some other state's assessment and do the return filing and so many aspects. If I have one authority, I need not go to so many places. I need to go to one place only. Whatever is there, I have to manage with only one person. I may not give repetitive answers, etc. In this way, our time is saved, and the local authorities who are actually trying to get the jurisdiction over us, they have so many things to do. Even we also see that every time the revenue goes up because of the GST, the administration actions, which is always giving another 100 crores, 1,000 crores more revenue. They can concentrate on that and leave us to a LTO authority who can sit and understand our issues and then close it. And I also find it easier to go to a nearest office where I am based at and attend the LTO. That is one of the advantages. Even for them also, it works both way. Department gets more time for concentrating on some other assessments. Today they are hundreds and thousands are only targeted again and again. Let them go over to so many people who are actually not compliant. Leave us to one authority, that is one. And the second thing is also from our side, we have time to concentrate on litigation, assessment, and compliances. The other point in that is, in the case of LTU, the authorities can have a better idea. If 2 to 3 years they are seeing our case, they can have a better idea. The third one is when we agree there should be an LTU coming into picture, then we should also have to think about how do you have a system wherein you have a single return. If at all I have to file 70 returns, I have local so many companies, then I have so many registrations within the same state. I have to prepare so many returns. Instead of that, if they provide one window where in single return I can put all the data of all the registrations, either that way or alternatively, we can file the same number of returns, but let the authority decide on all the states, whichever way it works convenient. This will save a lot of time for us, and by preparing again and again papers and submitting, as Arun was saying, future ready, thinking about what they will ask and all, always doing like this and preparing, we'll have only create volumes and volumes of paper. In my own experience, I'll tell, whatever we people have seen in the last 20 years in preparing documents for the assessment, we have seen in 4 years now. Within 4 years, we have accumulated so much of papers and there is no place to store them, which normally will come to any person attending say income tax or VAT or excise. For a period of 10 or 15 years, you will have an almirah of files. Today, it is overflowing after 4 years. Now we have to find more and more places to store the records. Then we have to find a total office, a total godown to store the places. So what purpose it serves? As Arun said, everything is electronic. They can see all the data. Let them only see the deviations. They have a data where they see there are certain discrepancies that they can ask us. We are always there to explain. Instead of that asking, give the name of your directors, then ask about give your balance sheet, give your this, give your that, etc. Which they can, what they do not have, they can ask. And the second important thing is that there is no one central repository. In income tax, you have one repository where the officer can see, or me, I can go and see where is my assessment. Have I completed my assessment, or is it gone to appellate authority, CAT appeals to ITAT, etc. Everything is listed there. We know for the last 20 years, the status of assessments are visible there only. Now, if they provide that, the next officer of the same state or the CGST officer at least will not come and ask the same question. As Shivdas sir said, he can ask a different question. On one question, again and again, they did not beat us. So that is an advantage of having a central repository. LTU is one of the manners in which you can have the central repository, where I will answer that. I can always say that I have only provided you last month, you go and refer this. Now this answer I cannot be telling to 25 states.
Sir, one kind of rather two things. One is overload of document, not knowing what to do with that or where to keep. The second is from the department perspective. I read it as we are in a situation of information overload, not knowing where to start or where to finish or what to do. So, sir, let me go to Mr. Shivdas now. Sir, on the legal, we want to kind of achieve this concept of LTU. Do you believe the existing structure enables it, or is there something more for the ground?
You see, this we should be conscious of the fact that this tax is a collaborative effort between the central and the state. That's number one. Number two, in the administration of this tax, even politically, from an optical point of view, the states are expected to have more say than the center, even from a GST council perspective, a voting perspective, etc. The states are expected to have a greater say in the administration. Now, if you're talking about LTU as a concept, it would be difficult to achieve it when the different states have say in the administration of the tax under their jurisdiction. Right? Therefore, if you're talking about LTU for a particular company, then it should be a situation where the center is given the jurisdiction for that particular company. Where the state is given the jurisdiction of that particular company and different states are involved, it will be difficult to achieve the concept of an LTU.
Okay.
why there is a definition of a proper officer, and there is also an exclusivity in terms of jurisdiction, the proceedings on a particular subject matter. These three are the fallout to ensure that only in a particular subject matter, either a CGST officer or a SGST officer takes the call. That's number one. But maybe the same objective could be achieved if the officers, state officers or the central officers could be told to rely on the very information that is available in the GSTN. At the end of the day, the GSTN is supposed to be the electronic storehouse of the entire information of all the assessees. Therefore, the first thing which the officers can be asked to do is not to go and ask every assessee whatever they want, like the typical checklist somebody was pointing out. But somebody did come to me with a checklist about 5 pages, and the checklist has got everything, all contracts, all work orders, all balance sheets, all every damn thing you can ask. And he showed me the same checklist by about from 5 different states. So I said, this is an information which ideally should be available in the electronic storehouse of the department itself. And that is why they talk about this data analytics. What is data analytics? They have the information with them in the system. They analyze whatever data is with them. And then, having come to a conclusion based on the data available in the system, they are supposed to come back to the SSE and ask their doubts on the conclusions drawn by them based on the information available. Therefore, to ask for the very same information from the SSE over and over, according to me, is completely uncalled for. That is something which the government should come out and say that the repository will be the basis for the assessments to be done, not the information which you will otherwise ask for from the SSE once their returns have been filed. Otherwise, there is no sanctity on your annual returns, then the reconciliation to be done in the annual returns. In fact, your annual return is as big as a voluminous document containing all sorts of figures, including reconciliations. Therefore, there is no need for them to ask for this information and then again and again. Therefore, that is the clarity which they are supposed to have. And suppose that clarity is there, that we will rely on the repository which we have in the GSTN, do one data and analytics, and then come and ask you the information. The same purpose which you want to serve through an LTU can be served even through this. Because every officer who is asking you is going to ask you based on what is available in the system and what they see from the returns that are filed with them for the respective states. That can be achieved even through this. Otherwise, asking for an LTU in an existing system of law may be slightly difficult. There has to be a broad agreement on all this from all the states. I don't see that happening from all these states.
Understood. Very.
Badri, sorry to interject. I have a point on this. I agree with what sir is saying because this can be a future ask, not the current one. But today, when GSTN is hosting all the data, there also can be a repository of information where many other things, whatever they wanted to ask, once provided, it can be available for retrieval by anybody. That will also reduce, it will be equivalent to LTU, where there is somebody who can have the data and see, any officer can see the data. And any officer can also see what is happening on that. And the other one is, surprisingly, when they are able to mobilize 1,000 crores and 2,000 crores based on so many analytics, why this small information, they can't do anything with that? As sir was saying that the GST return provides all the data, then you are having many such things which are available with them only, except for those which they do not have. So how come on the one side they are able to mobilize at least 5,000, 10,000 crores more revenue, on the other side they do not even know what is available with them, do a reconciliation which already we have to refer, please refer to your return file where we have already given the reconciliations, and then we have to explain them also, not only by writing a mail or going for a submission or submitting a document, also you have to explain it. So yeah, an analytics tool can provide all these things. They always have data of you as a supplier and me as a customer. Why somebody needs to again giving what I have sold to this person and what I purchased from this person? Unless and otherwise, both of us report two different numbers for which I don't have a reconciliation.
Sure. Understood, sir. Understood. Noted. So now maybe this was on the sector side, the legislative side, etc. Then we coming down to the kind of coming up with the assessment. before we kind of open up to the rest of the audience for their questions. So, two things. One is, the COVID-related expenditure. Arun, I'll take this to you. COVID-related expenditure. I'm sure very many taxpayers across India have incurred COVID-related expenditure for the employees, for their families, for the near and dear ones, and as part of CSR as well. So there is a mixed kind of interpretation, I would say, saying that is eligible for credit or it is not eligible. What would you believe we should do as a taxpayer, Arun?
Right. So, to my mind, if we have to call what is COVID related expenditure, if it's expenses uh, to the day-to-day functioning or to facilitate a work from home sort of a thing, it is certainly business expenditure. For it is quite essential for business to operate in a normal manner, and it is required to be incurred to maintain continuity of business and reduce the disruption. So there, to my mind, there is certainly should not be any doubt in terms of whether it is business expenditure, whether you can claim this as claim input credit on this. And it's also equally a question on income tax, whether it's a deductible expense or is it some sort of CSR. So I think there's a strong argument to say that these are business expenditure and certainly should be available for input credit. There is also accounting which sort of influences this. From an accounting standpoint, what is the position you take? The companies have to be a little smart. Is this staff welfare expense? If you account this as staff welfare, it is likely to be look more closely to say, okay, it's the welfare, not for business continuity, really. So that's where somewhere some of these accounting creates a perception of what is the nature of expenditure and how the business is perceiving this as this kind of expenditure. Certainly, if there are elements like insurance claims or supporting on treatment, reimbursing or paying some sort of compensation for COVID-related reliefs, there could be some challenges. If there are like an insurance step up, which is clearly in the negative list, there could be certain challenges. But broadly, if it's not in the negative list like insurance and it is for day-to-day running of business to reduce the disruption, it should be qualifying as eligible input credit. Having said that, will the tax authorities take a different view? Quite possible they might take a different view. That's where it is again important to these are gray elements. We need to build defenses to today, than leave it for later to see how the assessment, how people react during the assessments.
Sure. I'll just add one more thing to Arun, just from where you talked. Possibly be a situation of a different view that the department is going to take, and quite possible the view is divergent. So in the same breath, very many conditions I have to if I have to claim any amount of credit. Quite a few conditions that I have to fulfill, COVID-related, business-related expenditure. So, is there any advice that you would give us to all the taxpayers in terms of, what is it equip myself with, or what is it that I should do my housekeeping on to secure my input tax credit?
Okay, this is on general on input tax credit. What is the housekeeping to improve or maintain a good hygiene on input credit? Okay, got it. Sorry, your voice was breaking, so I couldn't get it. Yeah, so
Okay.
Input credit really is the discussion in most discussion with most of the CFOs in most companies these days, and now it's also part of the audit committee discussions. We have auditors presenting the input credit status as a standard quarterly update to the audit committee. So it has become a very important discussion in a lot of companies. So the hygiene on input credit is very critical. It has become very important, and the businesses are expected to have a good hygiene system to improve their input credit claims. So the challenge really is this: if the vendor is non-compliant, one, the customer is not eligible for input credit. The department would be reversing, or you would know as a customer, you can't claim input credit. So one, you have paid the money to the vendor and you're not able to claim credit. Second, the vendor is also subject to GST assessment. And whenever the vendor is able to correct his GST returns or take a corrective action and pay the tax as part of assessment or whenever, if the time limit is exceeded, there is no way that the supplier can recoup that input credit or claim back that input credit. So once it is lost for the supplier, and the vendor, if he pays tax again, the department is getting a double benefit in a way. So they collect the taxes and they don't give the input credit to the customer. So that as a law needs to change when there should not be a time limit. Whenever the supplier is paying the tax, the customer should be able to claim input credit, so that there's seamless input credit flow. Even if it's part of assessment, if it is after filing the annual return, so be it. There should be a seamless flow of input credit. That's one area which clearly the government needs to look at. Having said that, the businesses are now clear. There is a legal argument to say you have invoice copies, you can claim input credit based on invoice copies. The compliance by the vendor should not influence or disrupt you from claiming input credit. But these are to be tested legally. The courts have to uphold, and it's yeah. At this point, a safer position is be sure that your vendors are compliant. Now, how do companies work on this? How do companies put out a process to make sure that vendors are compliant? The one way which we've seen is making this input credit reconciliation more real time. With the IRN, this has become possible. With the e-invoicing system, this has become possible, where you can do a more real time input credit reconciliation, and you can take a corrective action at that point in time. Take a corrective action of either holding back the payment or holding back the GST amount, whatever is the company's standard practice. You can take a corrective action at that point in time and not wait for a month end to reconciliation. You can take a more real-time corrective action. However, there are certain restrictions or certain legal obligations like payments to MSMEs. You cannot default, you cannot keep it beyond a certain period. Those exceptions are there. So there could be cases of suppliers under quarterly GST return filing. So there's a uh, lag in the input credit reco. So these are exceptions where we need to have a parallel process to address these. But largely main vendors who are covered under e-invoicing, there is an ability to do a more real-time reconciliation. There are technology solutions still evolving, but there are certain technology solutions, and we are also looking at more real-time input credit reconciliation. The other element is vendor rankings and blocking of vendor codes and things like that, which is a parallel process to see we how do we sort of improve the internal control systems around input credits and ranking of vendors, and make sure that we only transact with GST compliant vendors and reduce transactions or avoid transactions with vendors who are not GST compliant. Lastly, I think it was one of the points raised in our previous GST conference, a very interesting point on reverse charge. Increasingly, companies prefer transacting on reverse charge mechanism because you have absolute control on your input credit. You're not waiting for a vendor to comply on input credit. Can there be an option of reverse charge, not for particular kind of service or goods supply? Can that be a general option given, where I would tell the vendor saying, please let us pay GST under reverse charge and you don't pay GST, sort of a thing. But of course, it will break the input credit flow. I understand, I'm mindful of it, but that is something which will help improve the input credit position.
I think that's a very big ask. I would say.
Yeah.
I've heard this quite a few questions. So maybe before we leave it open, sir, two last questions. I think nowadays discussions are incomplete without two aspects. One is anti-profiteering, the other intermediary services. Nowadays, as part of the assessment proceedings, I've seen a couple of cases where they've started asking for record to verify if I am compliant as a taxpayer, if I am compliant with the anti-profiteering measures. So, is it really something which the assessing officer in any of the proceedings, 60 to 65 of the CGST Act, is that something which can be a subject matter, can be an aspect which is subject to scrutiny by the tax office? Sir, would like to input something?
No, I don't think there is a bar on the assessing officer to pick up the anti-profiteering point. Okay, I think we would be taking too, I should say, a narrow view to say that it has to be done based on a complaint filed by a consumer, and then that has to be done by the DGAP and all that. That is the procedure. But if the officer does come across a situation where he finds that there could be a possibility of profiteering, he cannot do it as part of an assessment. The procedure, as envisaged in the Act, doesn't enable him to take it as an issue and maybe issue a notice to you, etc. That's not possible. But he can always refer it to the DGAP, the Directorate General, to say that this is what we have found. This is a clarification of the reply given by the assessee. It's for you to investigate and pass it on. That is possible. You can't say that the assessing officer cannot look into it. But yes, it cannot be part of an assessment proceedings. That's not possible. But there's nothing to do with your output liabilities, input credit and output liabilities.
I understand. Very important. That is. So, just an addition to what you said. Sir, 19 provision. That if they complaint to a product.
Voice is breaking.
Padri, we can't hear you.
Maybe I'll just switch off the video. Is it better?
Yeah.
So, sir, it is only in 2009 170 got amended. To say if there is a complaint, one for product A, say for a pen, which I'm manufacturing. If DGAB wants to extend, they can extend it with respect to a pencil that I manufacture, a different product other than what there. The point is that it has to be filed with the customer. Otherwise, the section 1 inference is that it cannot come into action.
Now, your voice was breaking, but what I understand from your question is that if the anti-profiteering authority is looking into the anti-profiteering that is done in respect of maybe a particular product, should they confine to that particular product alone, or can they expand their inquiry to a number of products made by you, or should they look into your business as a whole and then come to a conclusion? See, all three possible situations are there. One is one product, one is a set of products where you will have variety of products, and then completely dissimilar products, and lastly a business. The way I read the provisions is it is product specific. So if they look at a particular product, they should be in a position to tell you that you have made a profit in a particular product, where you are not, because the rates of taxes are product specific. Therefore, the anti-profiteering also is geared towards looking at whether in a particular product, when a rate is there, whether you have made profit or not. That's the whole purpose of anti-profiteering. They can't expand it to a business as a whole. In fact, my initial reaction also was that you should always look at, even to see whether a company is making a loss or making us a profit. If you look at the business as a whole, and if company is making a loss as a whole, then you should not pick out products and then say that this particular product you have made a profit, therefore I will not consider your business as a whole. So those are all small variations that can happen. But anti-profiteering is restricted only to a particular product.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. Maybe the last one to I'm sure you're tracking what is happening on the intermediary side. The number of advance rulings which have gone negative, even the AAAR has gone. So we are put in very many cases. And on the other side of the same transaction, I think wherever there is a whiff of the word marketing, I think it is taking the color of intermediary from the tax offices. Is there anything that you would suggest that we should, as a taxpayer, when this intermediary concept comes in?
Right. No, before I get into the intermediary service concept, Shraddha sir touched upon the the risk of anti-profiteering arising as part of GST assessments. It's actually quite scary if it is spread to that length and breadth. If you have 25 state assessments, each state authority sits in judgment of anti-profiteering, that could be disastrous. Uh, Probably the way Shraddha sir has explained, they don't have the authority, but they still pass on the recommendation to DGAP to investigate further. That probably would help in taking a uniform view, because the way anti-profiteering is, it's bordering on tax morality, right? What is the provision says, if you are profiteered on account of the tax law, then you should pass it on to the customer. So for a company to profiteer, it has become a very moral question, right? Tax moral. It's not your profit; it's tax money. How can you pocket it? So most companies who are subject to anti-profiteering are defending vehemently, because there were no clear mechanisms of computation of profiteering. There were no clear mechanisms of passing on the benefit. So people have done it as their own wisdom of understanding of the law. So it is at least good to hear that it has to be done by DGAP, and assessing officer can only pass it on to DGAP for adjudication. So that's something, for each one of us to watch out. Yeah, on intermediary. Yeah, sorry, Badri, you were saying
that I just said that that's a very important takeaway from what Mr. Shivdas said.
yes. I didn't want. I wanted to highlight that point. It's a very important point. So on intermediary services, this has been an issue since service tax law. Firstly, do we need a separate taxation principle for intermediary service when there is an export, in terms of the customer is outside India, you are realizing your consideration for the services in foreign exchange. Uh, why should this be treated differently than an export of service? That's a fundamental question. One needs to answer that. There's been an exception created under service tax law. The same exception is sort of continued in GST law. But to my mind, that exception is one, not required. Two, since it is there, it has been misused, abused, everything. So clear now that there's an exception, there has to be a clear definition of what is intermediate services. Is the current definition in the GST law good enough? Probably not. If it was good enough, there would not have been so much ruckus and a CBIC clarification in September 2021. Now that there is a clarification, does that clarification fully address the apprehension of the industry? Again, not, but very interestingly worded clarification. It went into interpreting each word in the law, then giving a simple clarification saying marketing services is not covered. They could have simply said that. They've said that about subcontracting. They said that about BPO, ITS, but they've not gone to the extent of calling out marketing service as an exception. So the ambiguity still continues. One good thing they left as a passing reference in the circular, again, probably reading too much into the circular language of the circular, is that they admitted that the law in the GST, the definition of intermediate services in the GST law, is very similar to the service tax law. So they probably also inferring that there should be a lot of grandfathering of the positions taken under service tax rulings. Hopefully the courts also view it that way. Having said that, marketing services is not clearly called out as called out in the circular saying it is outside the scope. There is still a strong argument to say that it is outside the intermediary services, because you are marketing. See, they are not pursuing clients as a commission agent. You're not a broker, you're a service provider. Can we take that agency broker word in a strict interpretation and say that marketing service provider is not a is a marketeer really, and not an agent or a broker? So in income tax also, there is this concept of an agency permanent establishment. The moment you become an intermediary, there is other exposure of are you a permanent establishment of the overseas principal. So it is a very dangerous concept the way it has been left out now. One has to build defenses again to defend this position pretty strongly.
Understood. Understood. Maybe that was good. Thank you, Arun. Thank you so much to all three of you. Maybe we'll just look at questions. What questions would probably have? There is one question from Ashish which says 26 AS is having with customer information. What is your opinion? Is it right to share? So maybe Arun, you would like to take that. 26 AS is having customer information. What is your opinion? Is it right to share that?
But so your GSTR 1 would also have your customer information. So I suppose it is information already available with the GST authorities. So the expectation is the revenue you are showing, which is coming in your 26 AS, is sort of also reconciling in your GST returns. But fundamentally, as a concept, 26 AS is a TDS done by the customers. So TDS is done by the customer on provision or payment, whichever is earlier. Income recognition is different from provisioning concept. Simple example is advance. There is TDS on advance, but there is no GST income or turnover on, you don't call it your turnover. So there are reconciliation items. So the concept in GST is different from 26 AS. So that department needs to understand before they bring in a simple reconciliation and say 26 AS is your turnover.
Sure. At least know the questions posted. So I request the audience to kind of unmute yourself and pose your questions. Anybody has, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask the question. Maybe anybody?
Just put the chat box.
Mr. TG Ramakrishnan is also here. Sir, good evening to you.
There's one question in the chat window, Badri.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It says, this, I am understanding that the GST authorities are in the professional to assist in conducting the audit of a taxpayer. Is this legally valid, and why should what should be the approach of the professional in this type of assignment? Sir, I think we'll take it from Mr. Shivdas on this. Sir, your thoughts on this, sir.
No, I don't think there is any legal hurdle if the department does hire professionals to assist in conducting the audit. We used to have it even in the earlier central excise regime where cost audit used to take place. Section 14A was there. So that used to happen. I don't think there is any legal impediment to that. If you're looking at what should be the approach of professional, if the professional mentioned there is a professional who is hired or it is from the company side, I think the simple answer is both should be professional enough in their approach. The professional who is hired is essentially hired to explain the activities or the business of a company in terms of understanding why these transactions have taken place. Now, what the professional should really be conscious of is that he is not taking the role of a tax officer. He is only a professional who is explaining to the department as to why this entry has been made, and leave it to the tax officer to come to any conclusion. So that distinction between the role of the professional assisting the tax officer and becoming a tax officer, and that distinction has to be maintained, because I've seen a lot of cost audit reports that have come as part of the show costs, etc., where the chartered accountant or the cost accountant does write a lot of assumptions which even the tax officer would not have written. So those are all things which we as professionals should be conscious of when we are being requested by the tax officers to assist them in the assignment. There is no harm in assisting them, but let us be clear enough as to what exactly is the inference that is to be drawn. If I am in the position of the company, what is it that I would have thought of when I make this entry? So that interpretation cannot, that you can have a different interpretation, but a factual position of it cannot be different merely because you are assisting the officers. That is something which we should be very careful about.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Mangesh, why don't you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Badri. Hi, Arun. Sir, my question is on the trademark. So normally the MNC companies use in India uses the trademark of company which is incorporated outside India. So what are your thoughts in terms of GST audit per se when they look at the use of a trademark in India? This is my first question. Again, second question, I've got small query, sir. On the training part. So whenever a new product or new services is launched, the headquarters is obligated to give some kind of a training free of cost. It is not chargeable basis, but it is done free of cost, so that in India we first we understand the, about the product, and then translate it to the retailers or the channel partners. So if in the agreement we have some clauses as training, if a new product is been developed, then they are obligated to give it proper training free of cost. So what are your thoughts on these two terms? Thank you, sir.
Sir,
see that sometimes the risk which I run is that these answers are taken as opinions and therefore are acted upon. Therefore, this is where I have to be very careful when I.
No, sir. No, sir. It is only for academic interest and nothing. We will come to you, sir, for sure. If there is anything, we have to come to you only, sir. Where will we go?
Why I'm saying this is I've seen in some of the references that are given to the department that in the lectures that were given or the BCIC given, so and so set list, therefore this is the answer, etc. I've seen. Therefore, I have nothing.
Dangerous. That is dangerous, sir.
Now, no, two things on this. One is, if the use of the trademark does come within the ambit of the intellectual property service. So if there is a permission being given to use the trademark, and then if it satisfies the definition of an intellectual property service, then on the use of the trademark, then GST would be payable on a reverse charge basis. Now, whether you give a consideration, you don't give a consideration would depend upon the type of the organization which is permitting you to use the trademark. If it is a related company, your own group company, etc., you don't even need a consideration. You automatically go to Schedule 1 and then you get taxed on that. How the value gets determined has its own methods. Now, training done free of cost, the same logic. If it is done, if it is given to you by your own group company, then there is a strong possibility that that can be taxed because it is done by a group company, no consideration required, Schedule 1 can get taxed. But all these are situations where you can take credit.
So, very good question on this trademarks. Practically, there's also, if it's related party, there's also transfer pricing applicability and arm's length determination under transfer pricing. Can those principles be used for the RCM computation? What is your sense?
Yeah, that should be. See, I am very clear about one thing. You can't have different departments looking at the values in different methods. That is not possible. In fact, I have always argued that what we use as transfer pricing should also be adopted for the purpose of customs valuation. So it cannot be that income tax department will look at the value in a particular manner, then the customs department will look at it in a different manner, the GST authority will look at it in a different manner. At the end of the day, transaction is one and the same, different aspects of it. So that definitely can be taken as a basis for supporting our views that this is the value on which I'm supposed to pay the tax.
With your permission, sir, just one thing on the valuation side. One important, at least in the cases I've come across, the methodology, the comparables that are adopted are frankly, in from a business perspective, are really not comparables. Right. So we should be very careful in identifying and selecting, saying, this is really a comparable, because in my transaction, when the allegation is that there is no value, so it goes back to determining the open market value or the arm's length price, as Arun, you were mentioning. So in that process, the identifying of the comparable, we should be very clear on. Very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
More questions? We have Mr. T.G. Ramakrishnan, but he's on.
Yes, sir, I am listening. I'm listening to you, sir. Very interesting discussions.
No, but Ram, what I was telling is you would know both the questions and answers, so there's nothing for us to really clarify to you.
Mr. Sivdas, I don't know whether you remember, our association has been around more than 30-35 years back in your office when, Lakshmi Kumar's office in Delhi. And your office. No, I just was in a call now, just came back and joined. And I still recall to everybody the wonderful office you all had in that, in Delhi, where everybody in Veshti and nice music, background music, fantastic. I've never seen anything like that. That is something which I really can't forget those days. Yeah.
No, but these days nobody does both.
But yeah, so like
music.
Now the controversy is slightly different. I don't want to get into it. In today's Karnataka.
But I don't anything else raising hand. So maybe let's take it to closure. We are anyway.
So I was just only one point here. If I can just take this.
Yeah.
On this interesting topic on audit, of course, we have seen through all this over the years. Nothing has greatly changed. In fact, it is, as Kannan was saying, it has become more bad because more than one cupboard, you have to store records. Having said this, since we have good people in the board, from a central civic point of view, Mr. Jowhari is there as chairman, as I was telling Badri, and of course our own Nagendra Kumar is a member. Some of these points, I'm sure the chamber can take it up with them, and at least in some GST meeting, whatever efforts the center can take it up with the states and see how best we can resolve this. That will really help industry, is what I think, sir.
True, sir. Sir, Kannan sir, yes, sir.
So I want to know that have you ever covered earlier about the state-wise trial balance, which is a topic going on for so many months and several circles. So have you addressed it, or if not, I have some points which I can say. I don't know whether it can be taken as a question or answer, but suggestion. So today, one part of that is the question. The state-wise trial balance, everyone has a different way of viewing it. If a question is asked by the officer where we can't provide, because if we provide, it becomes a false information. If we don't provide also, it is not obeying to the order or request. So what is the proposal for that? This is my question from the point of view of complying to the notices. The other one is a suggestion. Since we do not have any prescribed method, and the law also does not exactly say state-wise trial balance, it is only the authorities who are interpreting. So can't they give some like a trial balance has both liabilities and P&L and balance sheet items. Balance sheet items mostly are common, like right from you can say investments, share capital, debentures, etc. If you have 25 registrations, how will you allocate all? Again, coming to the P&L items also, there are items like consumption. So consumption can be in one factory which is in a particular state. The actual sale will happen in a different state. Is it right to decide that this consumption happening in a particular factory, therefore it goes to that state only in preparing a trial balance? So that clarity is not there. Again, corporate office depreciation, corporate office assets. While we know that the machinery of a factory can be identified with a particular state. Yeah, building of a corporate office will be in a state where you have IS registration as well as a normal registration. Should we show it in the normal registration, or should we put, where do we show it? Or if we can't show that, is there a method to allocate the cost of the building and many other costs? Or should we restrict our trial balance to only those items which are coming in your GST returns, all items which are expenditures having GST, sales, purchases, etc. Put others as a balancing figure in head office account. So there is still no clarity on how do we prepare it, because of these elements where you do not know how to allocate. Otherwise, it is easy. You have a registration, you have the data of purchase, sales, and various expenses. But the P&L is not stopping there. There may be many other items like conveyance where the employees are given reimbursements, and many items cannot be actually subject to GST, or low value items, and many like depreciation, which are corporate office. There are enormous items which can, and even laptop, for example, it moves from one state to another state. Somebody working in a particular state moving to another state. How do we allocate that? So that is a puzzle which nobody is able to find an answer, and everyone says this is my method. So various associates can have various methods and submit it. Is it good to submit on our assumption model, or say it is not possible? The law is not even asking. So it is a presumption. There is no state-wise request. It is only saying various data along with it they are putting trial balance. So it doesn't mean actually state-wise. Should our answer say that the law does not ask a state-wise trial balance, or say this is a trial balance I made based on certain assumptions?
Sure. Understood, sir. Maybe Arun and I will take these points from you. We can maybe submit a representation and meet up with Mr. Nagendra Kumar as well. Sure, sir. Sure, sir. With this, we come to an end to the close of today's discussion. Thank you so much, all three of you. It was a very interesting discussion, I should say. Quite a few takeaways. One is, of course, the learning is that there is an overload of information at all in all places, and the anti-profiteering, which Mr. Shivdas highlighted, the very, very important takeaways for today. Thank you so much, sir. Look forward to more interactions with all of you. And yes, I should also mention this today, saying as BCIC, the Indirect Taxes Expert Committee, I think we have a great team. Today's discussion is an example of that. We didn't really need to look beyond our member list. All three of them, all three today on the panel are on the committee of the BCIC in some form or fashion. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thanks a ton once again to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rupa?
Yes, sir. Sir, on behalf of BCIC, we express our sincere thanks, sir, for addressing at this panel discussion. Thank you once again, and we look forward to your participation in our future events as well, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.